Hello! Thanks for taking the time to join us for this presentation of XFest. I'm Cameron Goodwin with the Xbox Advanced Technology Group, and I'm excited to show you the latest features and updates from the Microsoft Store services. We'll cover how your own game services can take advantage of the following: the new authentication method for calling the store services using Azure Active Directory and its benefits, how to detect and reconcile refunded consumable items, the different subscription product types and how to manage a user subscription from your own service, and finally, how to detect a user's Game Pass subscription status to provide them the benefits within your Game Pass title. First, let's introduce the Azure Active Directory authentication flow to the commerce services and what user store IDs are. Like an X token, a user store ID is a token that identifies the user you are calling on behalf of in the new flow. X tokens are still supported, but user store IDs provide key advantages to partner services. We encourage your partner services to use this new flow if possible. The first advantage is that user store IDs are supported by all existing and future store services. X tokens are only valid for calling the Collections version 8 and version 9 APIs. A user store ID's lifetime is greater at 90 days compared to an X token's few hours. Additionally, user store IDs can be refreshed on your service without a client or user interaction indefinitely. X tokens can only be refreshed for 30 days before requiring a new client login. If needed, you should refresh a user store ID every 14 days to ensure validity, as the signing certificate will change frequently. But know that if required for security reasons, all existing user store IDs could be invalidated, and your service would simply need to get a new one from the client or user login. User store IDs also support the multi-account scenarios related to the Microsoft Store on PC, whereas X tokens only support the user ID signed into the Xbox app. Configuring new products to be visible to your services is also much easier and provides more flexibility than configuring requirements when you were using X tokens. If developing in a sandbox with the new authentication flow, you will need to specify which sandbox by using the SBX claim in the request's body. Whereas an X token, this isn't needed because that claim is built into the token when it is created. If your services are using delegated auth X tokens, there is a way to generate a user store ID from your service without having to update or change your client-side code. We'll cover that later in this section. To showcase the simplified configuration of products, all you need to do is add your Azure Active Directory client ID on the Product, Collections, and Purchases page of your game in Partner Center. Once saved, republish the product's catalog into your sandbox or into retail. It will then be returned in the results of your calls to the Microsoft Store services with the Azure Active Directory flow. To authenticate your service through this new flow, you will need to generate a set of access tokens and user store IDs. The access tokens are generated by the combination of your tenant ID, application ID, and client secret from the Azure Active Directory portal. There are 3 different access token types defined by the resource parameter in the creation request. Service access tokens represent your publisher or service. You never want to send or share this token with a client. It should only be used by your services when calling the store services directly. Collections access tokens are used to generate user collections IDs and, similarly, Purchase access tokens are used to generate user purchase IDs. User store ID is a generic term for either the user collections ID or a user purchase ID, which are used to identify the user to the corresponding store service. For example, collections requires a user collections ID, and any of the purchase services require a user purchase ID. Let's take a look at the authentication flow from start to finish using these values. Here, we have our custom game service, and we want to call the collection service to see the user's entitlements. First, we generate the collections access token by passing our tenant ID, client ID, and the client secret, and the collections URI resource parameter. This generates the collections access token that is sent back to our service where it will be cached. Second, we generate a service access token using the same IDs, but changing the resource parameter in the request to correspond to a service access token. We also take this and cache it for later use on our service. Next, we need the user collections ID, which is generated by calling an API on the client from the GDK. We need the collections access token for calling this API. So we send down that access token to the client and then call the API get user collections ID async. If we were generating a user purchase ID, we would need the purchase access token and call get user purchase ID async. Once the user collections ID has been generated, the client sends it back to our game service. We can now use the service access token as the bearer token in the authorization header and the user collections ID in the beneficiaries array of the request body to identify the user. Once our request is authenticated, we will get back the results of the user's collection data. There is an alternative flow to generate the user store IDs from your own service if you're already using delegated auth X tokens. In this flow, you can use an X token that identifies the user along with your collections access token to generate the user collections ID without exchanging the access token and calling the API on the client. This is specifically helpful if migrating existing services to use the Azure Active Directory flow without requiring client-side changes, or when using website OAuth to identify the Xbox Live user. The URI to call and the relying party targets of the X token are different depending on if you're generating a user collections ID or a user purchase ID. For more information on using delegated auth X tokens and this flow, see the GDK documentation. To help make integration with this new authentication flow and the Microsoft Store services in general, we have created a public GitHub library which can be used within or as a reference within your own code. The Microsoft Store Services library is a C# .NET Core library that handles authorization, calling, and parsing the data from these services. Additionally, the Microsoft Store Services sample is an ASP.NET Core example service, showcasing how to use the library. The sample also showcases best practices for managing consumable refund reconciliation with the clawback service and managing subscription products from your service. One of the newest services that we have is the clawback service. This allows your service to detect and manage any consumable products that were refunded to the user, but had already been consumed or fulfilled by your service. The clawback service reports the user's consumable purchase history from the last 90 days, and it returns them in one of 3 states. You can specify which state you want your results scoped to in your query request to the clawback service. Purchased indicates the consumable is in a valid state and no action for reconciliation should be required. Both fulfilled and unfulfilled consumables can be in this state. Refunded means the user was refunded the purchase price of a consumable that your service had not yet consumed or fulfilled. Because it wasn't consumed by your service, further reconciliation should not be required. Revoked, however, indicates that although a refund was issued to the user, the store services were unable to remove the quantity from the user's account. This means the specific refunded item was already consumed or fulfilled by your service before the refund was issued to the user. When identifying refunded transactions and users tied to them, you control what happens with that information and the appropriate action to take. Microsoft does not have a general policy or requirement in terms of refund reconciliation or actions from your service. Acting on these refund items can be used as a preventative measure for lost revenue, but we want to do what is best for your users and your system. General guidance is to call the clawback service once a day for each of the users within your system. It is not meant to be pulled continuously for each user throughout the day. To help identify exactly which user a refunded consume transaction is linked to, a new parameter was added to the Consume API. Adding include order IDs as a true value to the request body will return the order and order line item IDs used to fulfill the consume request. An order ID represents the user's purchase transaction, and an order line item ID represents each individual product that was in that purchase transaction. For example, with a shopping cart, all purchased items in the cart would share the same order ID, but each individual item would have their own order line item ID. As seen in this example response, the quantity used to fulfill the consume request from that order is also listed. To properly use clawback reconciliation, you should be tracking the following within your service for each successful consume or fulfillment request. Specifically, the ID used to track the user within your system, the quantity consumed, the product ID, and the order IDs. You will also need a status value to mark if this item had previously been reconciled in your system, because it will continue to be reported from the clawback results until it passes the 90-day limit. If you are working with a PC version of your game, you will also need to cache a user's purchase ID linked to their user collections ID used at the same time of the consume request. For more information on why this is required, see the GDK documentation. When calling the clawback service, the user purchase ID is provided as the B2B key value in the request body, and you can specify which state of transaction you are looking for. Generally, you would only want to look for the revoked state. Here is an example of a revoked consumable returned by the clawback service. With these values, we can do a reconciliation against the information we cached previously from the consume transaction. In this example flow of how our game service will check for and reconcile any refunds, we have our transaction history and a user with an outstanding balance of 1 noted within our system. First, we get the cached user purchase ID credentials of the user and query the clawback service for any revoked items. When the response comes back, we see that there is a revoked item in the results. We query our transaction history for any items matching this order ID and order line item ID. We also want to filter out any results that have already been reconciled previously by checking the status value. In this case, we find an item that matches, and the state indicates that we haven't reconciled it yet. We note the quantity from the transaction was 1. So we remove that quantity from the user's remaining balance, and they now have a 0 balance. Finally, we update the transaction status as reconciled, and we can skip it in the future if this result comes back again. Subscription product types within the Microsoft Store can be very valuable based on the model and design of your game. We also have services to help manage subscriptions through your own service on behalf of a user, creating a more streamlined experience. There are two different subscription types, but the recommendation is that game developers should focus on and use the store-managed subscription type rather than the add-on subscription type. Key differences between the two types are as follows. Store-managed subscriptions are more visible and able to be showcased on the Xbox dashboard, the website store, and other locations. Add-on subscriptions, however, can only be visible and purchasable from within the game's UI. Store-managed subscriptions can also have different per-region pricing, are redeemable with 5x5 tokens, and allow users to switch between pricing tiers. Add-on subscriptions do not support these features. When offering a store-managed subscription product, we recommend integrating your service with the Recurrence service. This service provides specific information about the user's subscription status and provides more information on the subscription than simply calling the collections endpoint. The Recurrence service also allows you to manage the subscription on the user's behalf with the Change API. With this service, you can extend, refund, cancel, or disable auto-renew for the user. For example, if your service had an outage, you could extend each user's subscription time by a day or two based on how long that outage was. Allowing users to cancel or turn off auto-renew within your game also makes for a good experience where the user doesn't have to go to the Microsoft account subscription management pages to do so. Additionally, this is valuable for your customer support teams. If their tools are integrated with the Recurrence service, they can assist users who contact your support instead of having to send them to another party or to the Microsoft support channels for assistance with the subscription. Because Recurrence is part of the purchase service, you provide the user purchase ID as the B2B key value in the request. Response will include both currently active and previously active subscription types. Some of the key values in the Recurrence response are the following. The ID is unique and used for calling into the Recurrence Change API for that subscription. And we'll cover that next. We also have the start time of the subscription and cancellation date if this was previously canceled. Auto-renew designates if they have signed up for auto-renewing this subscription, and the auto-renew will take place on the expire date given their current payment instrument tied to their account. Expiration time is when the subscription ends and an auto-renew attempt would start. If the user is set up for auto-renew, but their payment does not go through, possibly because their credit card expired and they weren't aware, then it would go into a state which is known as the grace period. While in the grace period, the user should continue to receive subscription benefits as the store continues to attempt to auto-renew the subscription on their account. We reach out to the users and notify them that the auto-renew is unsuccessful, but you could also send a notification to the user in-game to have them go and fix their payment instrument for the auto-renew. The expiration time with grace field indicates when the user should no longer receive subscription benefits as we have been unable to renew with their current payment instrument. After the expiration time with grace date, their account would go into what's called the dunning state. The user will be unable to repurchase the subscription until they fix their payment instrument, and the auto-renewal goes through. Once the payment goes through, the grace period time is deducted from their remaining subscription time. The recurrent state helps indicate if this is active, canceled, inactive, or is in that dunning state. To manage the user's subscription, you can use the Recurrence Change API. In this example request, this would extend the user's subscription end time by 2 days. As Game Pass has proven successful for our gaming partners and a great value for users, we have seen an increase in interest to verify a user's Game Pass subscription status, mostly in order to grant specific benefits within game titles to the Game Pass members. The latest version 9 Collections API, called Publisher Query, adds this as well as streamlined data based on developer feedback of the previous version 8 API. Publisher query requests do require you to specify each product ID you want results for, and all other results will be filtered. This is to prevent issues we've seen in production when users own lots of content under a single publisher and the query requests would time out gathering all of the user's items. Before you can view a user's Game Pass status, your publisher or developer account needs to be authorized and configured, which is done through your developer partner manager. When approved, you will only be able to access the Game Pass tiers that are relevant to your title's needs. For example, if you are authorized for PC Game Pass, you will get the PC Game Pass item in your results for all PC Game Pass members and all Game Pass Ultimate members, as PC Game Pass is included with Game Pass Ultimate. To get these results, simply add the specific Game Pass tier product ID into the product SKU IDs list as seen here in the query request. The returned Game Pass item has the following key values. Game Pass shares the same pass product type as a store-managed subscriptions. And recurring as the acquisition type means this entitlement is or is tied to a subscription product. Acquired date is the date that the user's Game Pass subscription started, but the end date value is not the actual end date of their current subscription period. The actual end date is obfuscated, and this value will always be the max date. If you are looking at products such as games or DLC that are entitled to a user because they have a Game Pass subscription, you will get different results depending on if you are authorized to have the Game Pass subscription info or not. For unauthorized partners, the product will show up in the user's entitlements but will appear as if they own the item directly, without any indication it is satisfied through Game Pass. Therefore, as a directly owned item, the acquisition type will show as single, and the Game Pass product ID will be absent from the satisfied by product IDs array. We've covered some great features today, and you can take advantage of all of these for your upcoming services. In summary, the new Azure Active Directory authentication flow to the Microsoft Store services provides key benefits over X tokens, including better offline support, account linking, and ease of configuration. You can now detect and manage refunded consumable transactions through the clawback service. Using the new Include Order IDs parameter on your consume requests, it's very quick and easy to identify these refunded transactions, the users tied to them, and take the appropriate action to reconcile those refunds. Partners wanting to create a subscription product should use the store managed subscription type and can use the recurrent service to manage the subscription on behalf of the user. Finally, you can now check the user's Game Pass subscription status with the Collections version 9 Publisher Query API, once your account has been authorized to have that information. Thank you very much for being a part of this presentation, and I look forward to working with you on integrating these great new features into your coming services and products. Thanks again for being here and joining us today.